This is Pitch Pitch. I'm Phoebe Tran, your host. Are you afraid that you don't have a good enough business idea? You don't need to. This is a show where you just need that one idea and that dream and aspiration to turn it into reality. You're gonna get trained, you're gonna get mentored, and you're gonna deliver a pitch that's going to be a lot better than you really think. So even if you don't have a business already, but you have that aspiration, this is a show for you. So we're all here today, and I'd really like to take this opportunity for you guys to really share what are some of the issues you have right now, starting out. And Tony can definitely give a lot of great advice. So who wants to go first? Okay, you're smiling really widely, so why don't you go first, Ting?
Oh, I know it because you guys are looking at me. So, my first question is, as I say in the interview section, I want you to share more about how to take advantage of user data to both benefit your business and users at the same time.
So let's answer that in a little bit, but what I would really want to bring it back to is your projects and your businesses and your ideas. So that's a great question for Tony to answer as this bigger picture, but what about your personal project? What are some of the difficulties that you're currently facing? And you should ask Tony as to what is some of his advice to resolve.
Okay, so I take, as you know, I am quite young here, so I do not have a lot of hand-on experience in business. I told you that I was more like Michael Jackson and I would do something crazy to attract investor, but I know that Michael Jackson doesn't sell. I should be someone like Elon Musk or others. To be dumb, I have to understand more about the market, about how to research, about how to do the math, about how to calculate the potential of my business. And do you have any advice for me?
It's interesting the way you phrase the question. It's actually a very complex question you're asking. It's a very clever one. But the starting premise is about the fact that you are young. And the question is, does that work for you or does it work against you? And what type of persona do you want to create to actually attract investment? It's an interesting one. You did mention Michael Jackson a little bit earlier about going crazy, and I was a little concerned. I thought that could be the craziest idea you've had yet and probably won't work. But being here from Australia, something I'm actually learning a lot about is the difference between the Australian culture and the Asian culture about how to sell. And so maybe crazy works. We'll see. The key thing actually with a lot of people is when they think about age, is they get worried about it. Some people are too young, some people are too old, and everyone tries to work out what's the right age. Now, what we know from statistics is that the most successful startups are typically done by people much older than yourself, much older than any of the three of you sitting here. So we actually know typically it's actually in the age of 35 to 50. And what that's about is that a lot of people, as you said, you don't have the business experience. So to get to business and to really make things work is more about how do I get that experience, how do I actually understand what it takes to build a business. Typically people in the older age bracket know that. When at your age, I was asked earlier about what was one of the most inspirational moments when I instantly said, that was awesome. It was by a young man that was the same age as you. He was 16. But he actually had his business plan together. He had his passion. He was very passionate about what it was he was doing. He had a real story and a real reason of why it was actually important. And what we knew straight away was that he was so committed to that he was going to do whatever it took to make it work. And it wasn't just some fantasy about this is a made-up problem. It was a real social issue in the world, and it was something he actually wanted to address. But he'd actually found some really good mentors early on that actually helped him put together a business case and a business plan and actually sort of work out how am I going to monetize it and make it sustainable. So being young is a challenge, but it's something you can overcome.
Let's define some of the things here. So there's a business case and there's a business plan. Now, are you guys confident that you have your case and you have your plan? Anybody here who's confident about that?
I'm confident that I have my case, but for the plan, I'm drafting it and then improving it. My method is to draft it out and try to see the plot hole and then keep improving it along the way when I start doing the plan.
So what is your case and what is your plan?
So my case is that I work with, I actually go to work already. So I spend 4 years to work with companies that doing export import. And I see, for example, in Vietnam, that they want to export overseas, but most of them, they would actually just export under somebody else's name. So basically raw material, they export out, but they're unable to sell their own brand. So now a lot of companies, they want to establish that brand. They want to promote their own brand overseas. So how do they do it? So I've encountered a lot of those companies that had that problems. So and through my experience and through a lot of conversations with the business owners, I know that I know some successful case of using e-commerce as one of the way to penetrate a new market, and I see that as one of the business case that I could work on.
Tony, do you think that's a convincing business case?
It's certainly a very common one. And part of the challenge is, as you say, the world of e-commerce, the world of online marketing, media attention, everything else. That's basically everything's exploded into that, particularly in the last 5 years.
Yes.
So in terms of a strategy, so actually having e-commerce platforms and using data and analytics to actually try and match and figure out how to penetrate that market is certainly a very legitimate business case. How do we know? It's because some of the biggest companies in the world are pushing that space right now.
Yes.
So when you look at the likes of Google and Alphabet, basically this is what they're doing their whole thing about right now, is actually saying we've just spent 10 years collecting every bit of data about you. Now we're actually going to work out how to manipulate you and manipulate that data and do it. So is it a sound business case in terms of, is it a piece? Yeah. The other part of what you talked about is also for individual brands and about, so there's a whole strategy question here, which is now about, do I actually use a brand or do I use a house of brands? Do I white label? And for a lot of companies, they do want to actually get out and have their own brand.
Yes.
And they just say, oh, it's an ego-based thing largely. It's like, I want my brand out there, I want to be different. For many companies, that actually won't work. And they're actually better off actually white labeling and actually having a distribution channel and a parallel go-to-market strategy.
Yes.
So in a broad context, it's like, is it potentially viable? Yes. Does it have to be taken and tailored to the actual individual company? Absolutely. So yeah, and I'm interested to learn more about it.
Yes. Thank you.
What about you guys? What is your business case and what is your business plan?
Actually, I have a personal problem. Yes, so my teams had 10 members, and we already pushed lots to develop the prototype within 1 month. So my choices is to first to find new opportunity to meet new people and call for funding, or second, I have to meet everyone in person and to connect every member of my team. Which one is more important?
So defining priorities.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting question, particularly for a startup. You're saying basically define priorities. I've got very limited resources. I really don't know where I'm going with this, and where do I start putting my resources or my energies into? Because I can burn that up very quickly. And we actually do see a lot of companies will actually put their energy and their resources into the wrong area and basically run out of what we call runway very, very quickly. So to really answer that, I need to know a little bit more about the product, the market, and the business case. But in terms of, as you say, if I've got 10 people, I've built a prototype, or what we call an MVP, minimum viable product, in 1 month.
Yes.
That's a good start. You're saying, okay, do I get investors on board? It would have to be a really, 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 really good pitch and exciting to get someone on board that early stage, because a lot of people actually develop an MVP, but they actually haven't proven that there's actually a market for it. So the first thing we always talk about is that the biggest reason for failure in startup land is poor product market fit. People come up with the most amazing idea. I've just invented a new glass of water, but does anybody want to buy it? But some people get so passionate about that glass of water that basically it's like, no, but this is the great idea. All I've got to do is convince 1 billion people that this is a great idea.
Yes.
So if you're trying to create a new market, that requires a strategy and it's much longer term. If you know that there's an actual pain point in the market, there's a real need and you're just going to satisfy that, that's a lot easier. So as we go through, we'll explore a bit more about what your product is and what your story is, and we can give you more guidance on where to allocate your resources.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now, we have 2 guys with ideas and 1 guy with a product.
Mm-hmm.
What is your advice to these 2 guys with ideas now that, like if they're going to pitch to investors and they don't have a product yet? When are the situations that, people can actually convince investors when they only have that idea?
Yeah. This is a really tough question. And to be honest, it actually varies from country to country. So in Australia, for example, pitching just an idea will pretty much never get investment. So the Australian investor is very conservative, and the sort of things they will always ask for is, have you actually validated your market? Do you have traction? Have you gone beyond prototype and proof of concept? So this is why for people typically with just an idea and maybe a PowerPoint presentation that outlines it, this is where we say typically where they'll get their early stage money from is what we call the Fs, the friends, families, fools or fans. And it's normally as like, Mom, Dad, I got this awesome idea. Can you give me an advance of my pocket money for the next 20 years so that I can actually get this thing off the ground? In America, for example, there are many more stories about companies actually getting successful raises, actually managing investment just with an idea. But typically what it has to be is, again, an incredibly good idea that is something unique, which there are very, very, very few of in the world, or you're already a proven team. So the biggest thing we actually often talk about also is that there's a million good ideas out there, but the real test is, can you execute? Can you deliver? So if you've already got a track record, like if you have a history of actually having been in business or even in family business, and I heard some of you talk about this earlier, that says, I've already been doing this, I have a proven history of being able to execute and deliver on my business plan, and here is my next idea, then you're more likely to actually get investment because they say, oh, okay, I know you're going to deliver or you have the capacity to deliver, and I really like your next idea. If you're coming up as someone who's completely green or fresh, as we say, the base says, I'm just out of primary school, I've just got this amazing idea, but I have no history, then very unlikely. Well, that said, I saw a YouTube channel yesterday. There's a 6-year-old kid that's now got his own channel and he's actually making $60 million a year by testing toys. So I assume the parents have put him up to it and just said, here, play with this, we're going to film you, and he's now got his own channel making a lot of money. But they are rarities, so I wouldn't count on them as your investment model.
Do you afraid that when you pitch your idea in front of big people, do you afraid that those big companies will steal your idea?
Yes. And again, this is a real challenge. It's intellectual property, and defense of that intellectual property is a real challenge. And if anything you're doing is in the software space, everyone is terrified of the likes of the Googles and the Yahoos and the Amazons and everyone else just going, that's awesome. Let's actually, it's going to take you 6 months to do that. We'll put 5 teams on it, $500,000, and we can have it done in a week. So there's a lot of people really scared about that.
Yes.
So again, you going into strategic partnership with specific big organizations or corporates can be a very useful investment strategy. But again, you need to be very particular about who you do that with, get agreements signed up front, but also be able to demonstrate that you have a particular skill set that they are willing to look for. Now, what a lot of the big companies, and I know this from personal experience with the likes of the Amazons and the IBMs and that, what they are doing is looking for very talented people out in the world to actually come up with really cool ideas. And what they know is if they keep stealing them, they're going to get a bad reputation. and people will stop actually doing that. So what they're now doing is encouraging, and there are many stories now of actually people coming up with an idea and them actually being bought early, so they have an early exit by one of these big companies, because these companies want to have a reputation of actually building small startups rather than killing them. So yeah, it can be a legitimate strategy in some cases.
Yes.
Are you confident to share your ideas with Tony after what he said right now?
Given that
You're
you're also
business-
being filmed and you're going to be on YouTube and you're going to share your ideas with about, I
With
don't know,
the
what are we
whole
up to,
world.
5 million viewers or something? It's like,
Yeah, sure. Yes.
excellent.
Justify it.
If I keep the idea to myself, I would never get as popular. Nobody would do
Absolutely.
it. Yes.
Yeah.
Don't you feel like there's a fine line between that fear of having your idea stolen and also actually getting your idea out in the first place? So let's say if it's a serial entrepreneur with multiple ideas, and these guys, some of them haven't really started anything yet.
Yeah.
Do you think the priority would be just to get it out first before
Absolutely.
worrying?
We said a lot of people will come to investors and actually say, before I tell you anything, and this is a little bit different than going to the big corporates, but if I go to angel investors or seed investors, they'll say, I want you to sign this non-disclosure agreement. Most investors won't, because we see so many that basically if we signed every non-disclosure agreement, we'd never be able to talk to another person again for the rest of our lives. But again, it's a bit like I said before, you actually have to build this element of trust. And so when people go on various TV shows and other actually open pitch forums, like if you're going to pitch in front of 1,000 people at a certain festival, we say, if you are worried about someone stealing your idea, then don't pitch it. Because even if you have non-disclosure agreements, even if you have certain levels of IP protection, there are many people in the world that won't care about that, and they'll just take the idea and run anywhere.
Yeah.
So that's the downside. The other part, the reality is that there are no such thing as a unique idea. Everyone thinks, I've got this idea, it's so amazing, I'm going to keep it to myself, and I'm never going to tell anyone. But as you said, but it never gets out. So the whole thing really is about getting part of an ecosystem, getting with a group of trusted people. The more you share your idea, the quicker you're going to learn out whether your idea works or not. And then you can actually start pivoting, which basically means changing your idea, changing based on feedback. But way too many people hold on to that idea, never release it in the market, and spend 2 to 3 years building something that no one ever wants. So early stage, get it out there, definitely.
And I think there's a concept that a lot of us are kind of mixed and not truly understanding. And that's the concept of a business and a startup.
Mm-hmm.
Which one of you guys think you guys have a startup, and which one of you guys think you guys have a business and not a startup?
We start.
Yours is a startup. What about you, Tim?
Startup.
Yours is a startup. What about you, Tim?
But first, you have to differentiate what is the business and the startup first, and then we'll get to choose, right?
So what do you think? How do you define them?
Well, startup is something that they can actually break through. Like they have exponential growth, much higher compared to a business. A business is something that more of so startup mostly or most commonly is in tech, because tech is very scalable, so that they can gain a lot of traffic and they can grow really fast. For business, it's more of a breaks and like the traditional one where you have to sell something, you have to convince people about your business and give it. But it's more of a business is more selling of necessity compared to startup is something that's an advancement of those necessities. I think that's the my own definitions. For my project, I think it would be a business because it would be something as a necessity. I want to carry it as something, a necessity that a business would need to do, or a standard quality for them to enter a market. They would actually use our products as a standard qualified system to start doing that business. Yeah. So it's not too breakthrough, but it's still scalable, it's still sustainable. Yeah.
Interesting.
What do you think? Do you? Yeah, go ahead.
I think the main difference between a business and a startup is the scalability. Say like a startup like Grab, just like several, it's a startup because just in some years it spread to the Asian, and something like a food store is not a startup because it is not that scalable. That you need to sell a lot of pho in several years before you have something to open a new brand of pho. So that's what I think.